Women can compete as vigorously and as effectively and as eloquently as the men on any given day. Don't mess around with me. I know who Bob Bowman is. That's the famous Olympic coach. That's Michael Phelps's coach. Colin was courageous in what he did. What I would have preferred is that he had a little more advanced counsel about unintended consequences. You've got to believe that human kindness is there in enough people whereby you'll never walk alone. So you just have to believe it and then go for it.
We're here with Ray Anderson, Vice President of University Athletics, Arizona State University, formerly NFL, Atlanta Falcons, Harvard Law School, sports agent, Stanford. Where does this story start, Ray?
Well, it starts at 9 years old when unfortunately my father died. And that's the day I declared I wanted to be a lawyer, because he had always talked about wanting to be a lawyer himself. Had these law books in our little den, and from time to time he'd be flipping through them. The black and white TV in the den would have Perry Mason. That kind of set my track, and here I am, 62 years old, a lawyer and an AD at Arizona State University, Jeff.
When your father dies at 10 years old, how did the family manage affairs?
Well, my mom was 29 at the time, had worked at the telephone company. She and my dad had married at age 16. Fortunately, we had an extended family, with my dad having 9 sisters and 2 brothers, so that group could rally as best they could under difficult economic circumstances. And then we had a strong community. Neighbors in and around the block who just rallied for each other. So we ended up with a village, if you will, of folks who wanted to make sure that myself and my sister Paula stayed on the right track.
Not every village produces a Stanford undergraduate and Harvard Law School graduate. What did your village do to you?
Well, they kept me on the right track. It inspired me to, don't give up the dream to do what my dad had wanted to do. All of that really translated into a lot of love. And then I had teachers and principals and at elementary school, all the way to junior high school, all the way to high school, who really made it their point to make sure I had opportunities for success. And, it was that village that came to my rescue.
Any particular teachers come to mind that really made an impact?
No question. And back in the day, coaches also taught. So Lloyd Parkson, who was my freshman football coach, who had landed on Iwo Jima. Mr. Price, who was my chemistry biology teacher, who was the first one to say, you know what, I'm going to take you out to the ocean and teach you how to surf. Think about that. Young black man, young black boy, with a teacher who said, teaching you how to surf and get you out to appreciate the ocean and the environment is something that I want to do to contribute to your experience.
The era that you grew up in was 1968, the Watts riots. Can you go back and tell us what you were thinking when that was going on, what was going on in your life?
When the Watts riots hit, it was profoundly scary. Because we didn't really understand at that age. And the thinking back then, given the coverage, was that you thought, Rome was burning. It was really quite impactful on my life, because that's when I realized that it was not a perfect world. There were a lot of challenges and problems in our society, particularly as it related to the black experience.
4,000 people were arrested. America was on fire, and yet we've re-experienced some of those issues again today.
I think it's human nature perhaps to slide back, which underscores the fact that you have to constantly be educating and involving in making sure that folks understand that if you let up, you will slip back. And so what's going on now, while unfortunate, it's not really, to me, surprising. But what I have is great faith that, as in eras past, we will figure a way to be resilient and move forward and make some progress. And I suspect we will do that for maybe eternity. Make progress, slip back, sit back, reflect, redo your game plan, get everybody on board, and then move forward, hopefully in a positive way.
What is it like to have to think about winning 24 sports every day of the year?
The wonderful thing about this collegiate experience is that it is the academics first and the competition second. So it's not all about winning. We're in the leadership development business. And so our culture and our environment is intended to put young men and women in a situation where they will compete academically very robustly, they will compete in terms of their social leadership development very robustly, and then they will get on the field of competition and compete very robustly. But it's not the wins and losses at the end of the day that drive us, it's the holistic experience. But if it's geared toward leadership development on the academic side and on the social side and on the time management and leadership side, then the wins and losses on the competitive side will come.
When you run athletics for Arizona State University, for many people, you're the face of the university. Is that a responsibility that bears a heavy burden?
In our view, that's an honor and a privilege, and we take it very much to heart. So that no, it's not a burden. I'm proud for those who may identify me as the face of the franchise, certainly the face of the Sun Devil athletics franchise. But I would defer and say that the face of this franchise are all the young men and women, our student athletes who are here competing in the classroom, in the community, on the field on our behalf. Those are the ones that really stand out. I happen to be a beneficiary of position, and that's all.
You must be an expert in the teenage business. And teenagers and good behavior don't necessarily go together. Every day someone could be doing something wrong. What do you do to communicate to them that they're carrying the flag for the university?
Well, I'll defer to someone else to be the expert on teenagers because Lord knows I didn't score 100 points even with my own kids growing up, but they turned out all right. When a young man or woman commits to ASU and the parents deliver their kids to ASU to compete as part of our student athletes in varsity sports, we tell them and repeatedly tell them, we're your surrogate parents. And so what we're going to do is we're going to treat you like our own kids. And our philosophy is that we're going to surround you with all that we can to make you successful. We're going to give you programs. We're going to give you the best coaching. We're going to give you the best counseling and the mentoring. And we're going to really treat you as our own. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to baby you, and we're not going to entitle you, and we're not going to allow you to cut corners and to think that you are above the non-student athletes. And we're not going to allow you to embarrass yourself, your families, or this institution. And that's our deal.
You recruit some of the top men and women athletes in the country, and you get to know men and women athletic winners. Is there a difference between men and women top athletes?
No. My experience is no, because elite athletes want to perform at the highest level possible, and frankly, they want to win. And so if you've got that passion and that drive and that dedication, those are common features that you will find in the men and the women. And certainly there are times where I wonder if there is a difference, and very frankly, some of that falls on the side of the women. I'll give you an example. If you've ever been to a women's water polo game, water polo match, go. Watch them in the water. Watch how physical and tough and very non-ladylike they are. They want to win, they're driven, they're passionate, they're competitive. It's a beautiful thing to see.
But we're experiencing gender issues in society. We recently had a march. And yet you're sending the signal that men and women athletes have moved beyond that in some respects and are really about achievement.
Well, I think one of the greatest pieces of legislation ever passed in this country was Title IX, which essentially said when it comes to varsity, collegiate competition experiences, you have to give women as many opportunities as you do men. And I think sports is a great leadership development and confidence building and time management and all the skill sets to really be successful at being a competitor. I think you can show that women can compete as vigorously and as effectively and as eloquently as the men on any given day, not just any given Sunday, as they say at the NFL, but any given day. And it's a great place for lessons. That's why I'm so proud to be here and in collegiate athletics, because we will put out women leaders having gone through the student athlete varsity competition experience who will get out there and make an impact and walk shoulder to shoulder with any man who wants to have that privilege of walking shoulder to shoulder with her.
Title IX was legislated, and it's working. But why did it have to be legislated?
It's human nature. We are what we are. Sometimes you have to force change on folks who would otherwise resist it. And so Title IX was legislation, just like a number of our laws related to equity, inclusion, and desegregation had to be legislated. But that's just kind of who we are as a society, and very frankly, isn't that around the world? A lot of things have to be imposed in terms of change, and in our case, it's legislation, thankfully in the democratic way.
Now, many people think Harvard Law School must be the toughest experience in life. Is that true?
The tough experience in life is getting to the point in life where you can make some decisions about what you want to be, and then hopefully chart your course as to how you want to get there. That being said, my first year at Harvard Law School, in terms of the academic rigor and the time demands and the competition with students around you, was absolutely the most challenging thing I've done, at least up to that point in my life academically. But it was also so invigorating because I'm a kid who came from Southern California, went to school at Stanford in the north. I think the heaviest jacket I ever wore was a Letterman's jacket, and I get back there, and then you have to deal with the weather, and then you have to deal with the fact that there are a whole bunch of smart people in this world, and that also gave me some real good humility, if you will, to be in and around that environment of folks who had gone to these outstanding prep schools, and it was an amazing experience. But what it did was it taught me to just once again, like you've always done, hunker down, compete, dedicate, and that you're just going to work harder than everyone else. I had very few free weekends because we were grinding away in our studies. But it was a tremendous experience, albeit that first year at law school was tough.
Harvard Law School is famous for the case history method. And the challenge, I think, if you can correct me on this, is that the law professor calls on you and you don't know about it, and you just have to be prepared and get up and summarize a case in front of the classroom. How intimidating was that?
You're given your case assignments, and then they have a seating chart, and so when you get into the room, and my constitutional law professor was Archibald Cox, remember that name? And when Mr. Cox says, "Mr. Anderson, would you please give us the facts of the case of Cunningham versus Jones?" And you're supposed to stand up and then recite the facts of the case. And then if you think you're off the hook after you recite the facts of the case, then he will then commence to ask you a series of questions with regard to what was the majority decision, what were the main points made, what was the dissent. And you could, in some instances, be sitting up there for 5-10 minutes, and it felt like the whole hour getting grilled by your professors. Very intimidating, as the rest of your classmates were either sitting there watching you or raising their hands in earnest because they wanted to correct you on the spot. It was pretty awesome, but certainly intimidating. But I never had any moments where I felt like I had been embarrassed off my feet, fortunately.
Now, you went on after law school to become a sports agent, following in the steps of Jerry Maguire. And then you joined the NFL in an executive role and the Atlanta Falcons before coming to Arizona State University. When you came here, what issues were you thinking about in making that career decision?
First of all, Jed Hughes, who runs the search firm Korn Ferry, had this assignment. Jed and I have been friends for years, and he called me and said, "Ray, you need to look at this opportunity at Arizona State. You have Dr. Michael Crow. Don't look at the athletics per se, but look at this development project that they call the Athletic Facilities District. It's 330 acres right there adjacent to campus. It needs to be developed as an urban hub. There will be new facilities, retail, multi-use housing, research and development. It's going to be a development project that no other athletic director is going to get a chance to ever participate in, because there are no other circumstances like this in the country. And this Dr. Michael Crow helped create that with the Arizona legislature. So think of it in terms of way beyond any other athletic director's duties. And here we sit today, because anyone who has spent some time with Michael Crow very quickly understands the vision and the uniqueness and the creative thinking and the innovation, and more importantly, the compassion and the passion and the commitment to make a real difference on a global scale. That's kind of hard to resist, and I could not resist, and it's the best decision I ever made professionally.
How did you come up with a strategy for what you were going to do to transform this program?
This was a place that you could really come in and have an ability to transform an athletic department into something different. And I knew with the creative mind of Dr. Crow that there would be very few limitations and that there would be no expectations to maintain the status quo, which meant for me that I could come in and do an assessment and then make appropriate structural changes, personnel changes, could identify the cultural changes I needed to make after I got a chance to see what I had here, very frankly, to judge people, judge department, judge programs, make evaluation of coaches, evaluation of support staff. And then in a very short period of time during the assessment, Jeff was able to come to the determination that I needed a hybrid model. I wanted to preserve some of the traditional, historic, collegiate things because there's a lot of good there, but also needed to insert a very serious professional business approach to running this department because college athletics had evolved into a business.
One of the things you turned around was the swim program. And it started with a recruitment challenge.
Frank Bush, who was the head of USA Swimming, is a good buddy of mine. He was one of the sources. And he called me one day during the search and said, Bob Bowman would like to talk to you. He may have an interest in the ASU swimming job. And I said to Frank in somewhat street language, don't mess around with me. I know who Bob Bowman is. That's the famous Olympic coach. That's Michael Phelps's coach. And then fortunately, Bob Bowman's representatives are also old friends of mine, the people of Octagon, Peter Carlisle, Phil DiPicciotto. So when we made that connection, then I could easily verify that, in fact, the interest was real. And then, to our good fortune, Bob Bowman represents Michael Phelps and a number of other Olympians. And part of the intrigue of this job was to be able to get back into the collegiate coaching atmosphere, because he was the head coach at Michigan for 4 years some years ago, then went out of the business to essentially train Michael Phelps and a number of the Olympians. And then a chance to come back into the collegiate space, come out here to this wonderful Arizona community, be able to train Michael Phelps in what ended up seemed like another half dozen Olympians in our environment and do it all at once. And I must tell you, when you have 3 or 4 parents stop you to say, Mr. Anderson, thank you so much for the opportunity you've given our child by bringing Bob Bowman and his program to ASU. These last 2 years have been an unbelievable experience for them as part of their ASU experience. And we thank you and President Crow for allowing our kids to have this type of advantage. That's what this is all about. And so you get a chance to bring in a Bob Bowman and all of the things positive that can happen. That's what makes this such a special environment. I love this collegiate space.
Tell me about the magic that a top athlete coach brings to the party.
He's recognized as one of the, if not the best swimming coach in the world. And no matter how good you think you are as a young person coming out, you know you can get better with world-class coaching. When you get a Bob Bowman or a Zeke Jones or Greg Powers like we have now in hockey, and you go in Bobby Hurley in basketball, you can get into just about any home of any recruit. And then you make your case about ASU, the institution, what we stand for, what we're trying to do in terms of leadership development, as well as academic advancement, as well as athletic competitive competition at the highest level, so that you're just not thinking about performing here, but you're thinking about going on to perform on our international teams and our Olympic teams at some point.
We've got huge problems in this country in inner cities affecting a large number of African American boys and girls, and we understand that. Is what we're really having a coaching problem? If you take the examples that you've given of how powerful coaches' influence can be.
If you don't have strong educators or strong education processes or programs to give these young men and women in underserved areas a chance to know the reality, a chance to be educated about the possibilities or the options, then we haven't provided them the correct coaching. Because coaches at this level certainly, and I suspect, not suspect, but I would say at every level, high school, junior high, even elementary school, are teachers, they're educators. But they have a chance to get them in a very structured environment, because you got to go to practice, you got to go to film sessions, you got to go to study hall, and then you can really educate, because that's what they're doing. It would be unbelievable advancement if, in fact, in general society, we had more of a coaching way of delivering that education.
One of your coaches described your negotiating style as tough but effective. And when you made an offer, you made it clear that that was the offer. Can you share with us any tactics that you use in your negotiating that people could learn from?
Our philosophy is, let's go in and be aggressively fair to our coaches. Let's be aggressively fair, which means we're going to give them a very solid competitive offer. And in some cases, when there's urgency, and we also have options in A, B, and C's lined up at the door for a very coveted position, you don't have to, very frankly, waste a lot of time messing around. They don't always like it, but you know what? They respect it.
So to a young man or woman looking at a career decision, what should they be thinking about in addition to the money?
Look around and determine what are the values, what are the commitments, what are the passion levels, what are the urgency levels, what are the just fire levels of the folks with whom you will be working, because that will serve you and propel you more positively than the dollars and cents any day. And so what you learn in a good culture, in a good environment with good core values will serve you a lot more so than the extra $100 a week in your paycheck.
Should they be looking at the kind of leadership?
I don't think there's any question that they need to consider, because in most organizations it starts at the top. And what they need to, in my view, look at is, again, focus on the culture. Try to determine validation points of what that culture really is. Because that will help you determine if you're a fit for that culture, or if that culture is something you want to be a part of. Not all cultures are as positive as others, and not all cultures fit everybody's personality. And so they really need to do as much work as they can on the leader and verify, however they need to, talk to anybody and everybody. Talk to the janitor who works for the company if you can. Talk to the groundskeeper, talk to the folks who aren't in the high glitz, high dollar positions, and just ask them, how are you treated here? And if you don't know the culture and the leader, you're stepping into unknown territory, and that could be dangerous.
You told your coaching staff you want them to get out of their silos. What did that mean, and was that an inspiration or a challenge?
No, you know what, it was not a challenge. It was an inspiration, because we need to support each other, and coaches live in a very high-pressured environment. And to the extent that you can look around and know that your fellow head coaches in particular are rooting for you because they're rooting for Sun Devil athletics as a whole, that's a good thing. And what it also does, it's another culture advancer for us, because our culture is, we're not just a football and basketball school. We got 26 sports. Olympic sports, women's sports, they're all critically important. And so we need to support them all at the highest level we can. And when you see fellow head coaches doing that, there's no more profound message for our culture than that.
How do you keep morale up when you're being judged on your wins, but it's taking you time to get there?
If you have a program that is struggling in terms of the wins and losses, but in all the other measures are doing wonderful things, you pause and you balance that, because it's not all about the wins and losses, as we say. But at the end of the day, there is an expectation for a head coach at a Power 5, Division I, elite varsity level, that you are going to produce wins at a greater clip than you produce losses on the court. That's just the reality. And so you have to balance each one, and hopefully you do it with a lot of thought, very frankly, in the appropriate cases, a lot of compassion.
I'd like to ask you about Colin Kaepernick.
Sure.
Would you have handled, as a coach, would you have handled his situation any differently? And what do you think is going through his head, and is it effective?
You know, Colin was courageous in what he did. I'm glad he took a stand. What I would have preferred is that he had a little more advanced counsel about unintended consequences, to be able to reflect and see if there were optional ways, different ways of going about making his statement that maybe wouldn't have had the backlash negative that it did for him. But I applaud him for feeling empowered enough as a citizen of this country to do what he's done. Were I the coach, and were I someone who maybe had advance notice of his intentions, I would have tried to at least make sure that he was thinking through the ramifications. And then to the extent that he understood that and wanted to do what he did, then that's his power, that's his right as an American citizen. And I would have supported that wholeheartedly, because I happen to believe in freedom of speech and the Constitution, expression. Particularly by young folks, and very frankly, particularly by young African-American men who have had to deal with a lot of adversity.
What can we do as a society to make the world more appealing and better understand what African-American young men are going through?
We're talking about it here, Jeff, and that's education. Advancing and insisting on education. Because you know, in a lot of our school systems, whether we like to admit it or not, they're not real gung-ho about teaching African-American history and about the negative things that have happened to people who have been underserved, disenfranchised, et cetera. So to really insist on across-the-board consistent education about the history, particularly in this country, of what the African-American community has endured. And I think that education will hopefully bring along more compassion and understanding about why change is so necessary, and why folks like Colin Kaepernick and others feel that they want to try to push change by vocalizing and messaging in ways that maybe everybody doesn't like.
What would you say to a young Ray Anderson who may have just lost his father, to make him feel that there's going to be a great life ahead, even though he probably can't understand where that's going to come from?
That you have to believe that if you commit and you demonstrate that you're not going to pout, you're not going to whine, but you are going to work hard and dedicate yourself, particularly to getting educated, and that you are able to communicate in a genuine way that you really mean it, then there will be folks from all walks of life who will extend you a hand and help bring you along. That was my experience. Never, ever did I feel like I was alone, because I had not only my village, but external folks who, once they know my story and realize that, you know, this young kid he's dedicated, he's on a mission. They want to help you along the way. So you've got to believe that human kindness is there in enough people whereby you'll never walk alone. So you just have to believe it and then go for it.